if you want to you're gonna have to unmute yourself. Okay. Well, let me ask a few questions, and maybe some folks are like actually tuning back in at 5:35. Kevin, one question I had was, the terrain, the 3D terrain stuff is pretty cool, and is it possible to use your own terrain for to put into TerriaJS?
Yeah, yeah, it is. There we have a terrain catalog item, which means that you can make a terrain data set, any terrain data set that's compatible with Cesium, an entry in your TerriaJS catalog. Of course, the difference between terrain and any of the other sorts of data that you can add to your map is that you can really only have one set of terrain at a given time. So when you turn one on, it turns an existing one off. But other than that, it works pretty smoothly.
So it'd be possible to use this to, say, perhaps explore like LiDAR data, or like new drone-based terrain surveys.
Yeah, absolutely. We have there's actually a startup here in Sydney that's called Propeller Aerobatics that is using TerriaJS-based application to present photogrammetry-derived terrain and imagery to their users. And they use this mechanism that I was just talking about.
Do they have any, is that proprietary, or do they have any catalogs that they could share on that,
That is proprietary. They have a decent video that kind of shows it off that I could show maybe, but yeah, unfortunately there's no publicly accessible software we can show.
Yeah, for the drone stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to pause here and just see if anyone else has questions.
Yeah, Kevin, this is Rob Dollison. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi, Rob.
All right. Yeah, I just had a question on some of the tool libraries. Do you have sort of other standard sort of analysis tools, things like measurement or buffering or profile, some of the other, sort of standard this kind of thing?
Yeah, right. So the first one you mentioned was measuring. So we do have that one. If I can get the go-to meeting window out of my way here. So we do have a simple measure tool within TerriaJS. So if you can still see my screen, this is what it looks like. It lets you draw out lines as you'd expect, and it tells you the distance along them. But TerriaJS isn't really meant to be a general GIS tool, so we haven't put a lot of emphasis on sort of the typical GIS stuff of buffering and all that, right?
Yep.
So certainly you could integrate other tools that do that sort of thing, and you could use TerriaJS as the visualization of that. And you can also hook into, if you want to run geoprocessing services on the server, there's hooks to present the interface to that in the TerriaJS UI, and then ship it off to a server to do the computation and then display the result back in TerriaJS. But there's no built-in support for those kind of GIS tools, other than this measurement.
Thanks, it's very helpful. Yeah, I could see most of the focus was on visualization and interesting, excellent capabilities on the catalog. I know we've used the earlier versions and done some experimenting with that, and hope to continue to work with the newer version.
Yeah, cool.
Anyone else? So I had a couple other questions, and you folks can keep jump in after me. But I know that you mentioned CKAN catalog search, and I don't think you mentioned CSW, but I know you have.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you have the ability to make a catalog item that does dynamic queries on CSW as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, certainly, Rich, you're kind of an expert in that, right? You've done a lot of really good work with pushing the envelope for the CSW support in TerriaJS. So pretty much the way it works is you can create a catalog item or a catalog group within TerriaJS. So all these things I'm showing in the UI right now are catalog groups. And when you expand it, it does a live query to a CSW server using a customizable query payload, right? And then when it gets back the response, the data sets that the CSW knows about, we organize those into groups like you see here, and any geospatial items that TerriaJS knows how to show up as catalog items that can then be added to the map. I don't know if I have a good demo of that handy. What I just showed here is CKAN, which works essentially the same way.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I think I think that's okay. I think I asked this question to you before too. But if you wanted to build a tool, say that would be a user interface to allow somebody to select a region, say select some institutions, some keywords, a time extent, and all that kind of stuff that would go into one of these queries instead of formulating it in the catalog, how would you go about that? By creating a service, or would you just build something right into TerriaJS? I mean, I'm just trying to explore like the what a developer, how a developer would kind of add that functionality.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I didn't cover that really well during the presentation there. So one of the important design focuses of TerriaJS, from a code architecture kind of standpoint, is that it's meant to be really extensible. So all of the connectors to different types of geospatial data and also catalog sources are a sort of a common interface that you can plug other functionality into, or you can plug other sources into. So we could write a new type of catalog group that knows how to query a new type of catalog source, for example. And then what Rich was just getting at there is that it's also possible to do some pretty neat things, like make a catalog group. Remember, a group is like the folders that you see here. But rather than just open it and you're done, we can present the user with basically server-defined inputs to that group. So rather than just a straight-up group where you open it and you see whatever's in it, when you open it, you're asked for parameters to the query, which once you supply, it does a query to the server, gets back responses, and dynamically presents that in the UI.
And that was sort of what you were. Oh, sorry. But that was sort of what you were showing with the templating in your catalog entry, right? I mean, a related concept, I guess.
Yeah, similar idea, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's a templating on the feature side. So when you click a feature on the map, how do we present it to the user?
Yeah.
Whereas this is more like templating on the catalog group query side. So same idea, but a different application. It's actually really similar to the web processing service thing that I showed in the video there. The difference being that when you query a WPS server, what you get back is maybe some map-based data or a chart or something like that. In this case, you would supply parameters in much the same way, but what you would get back is catalog entries.
Right. Okay. Anyone else? I don't want to hog all the questions.
Yeah, this is Micah Wengren. I have a question, actually.
Go ahead.
The development environment for TerriaJS, does it have a full API or a catalog of controls? Can you programmatically, say, change the layout or user interface easily as a developer?
Yeah, as a developer, you certainly can. So the TerriaJS user interface is built on React, and so at a code level, the whole thing is very componentized, and it's possible to take the existing components and move them around, put them in different sections of the screen, or choose to exclude some of them or add new ones or that kind of thing.
And I guess you gave some, and you gave some examples of different groups, I guess, who would kind of put a little bit of a different skin on it.
Yeah, sure. So one example is, everybody still see my screen okay?
Yeah.
So this is the State of Environment report map. And one of the neat things that this app incorporates is a help system. So if I hit this help button, I can choose one of these things, and it does sort of this interactive on-screen help. Right. My mom needs to stop calling. So that's an example of custom widgets that are integrated into an application and sort of alongside TerriaJS. The other thing I can show you is this is the TerriaJS website here. And if we go over to documentation, this has documentation for how to connect to different sorts of data. So these are catalog items that are represented on the map as layers, essentially. So we can go look at how to set up a web map service, for example. So there's APIs. First of all, within the code, there's an object model that you can code to. It's also possible, and more typical, I would say, to configure TerriaJS using JSON configuration files, and it has really rich capabilities for defining what's on the map and controlling the map by doing things like dragging and dropping JSON files onto the map, or specifying their URL in the map's URL, or even controlling it using cross-window messages. So embedding TerriaJS in an iframe, and then having an external web page that includes that iframe add data to the map by posting messages to it. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, that's basically what I was wondering. So thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah, I mean, that maybe it's worth repeating. I mean, you just mentioned it, Kevin, and I just didn't realize that you hadn't shown this. But one of the things that I thought that attracted me to TerriaJS when I first saw it was this concept that you could basically put on the URL, add to the base, TerriaJS URL, a URL that pointed to a JSON file that was just sitting out there, say, it could even be as a gist or something, and that would basically create a custom portal, with a bunch of layers and a bunch of behavior, and like that bird migration demo, all without installing anything, just creating something out on as a gist, and then you can give somebody a URL and they think you've created a fancy portal.
Yeah. Let's see if I can show you what that looks like. So if I go to National Map here, and then go to this config JSON file that I happen to know exists, you can see this initialization URL section. And this is defining the set of JSON files that are loaded in order to define the catalog. So if I take that URL for National Map there, and I go over to this other TerriaJS based map here, and add that to the URL, let's reload that. So the first thing that happens is I don't have a catalog anymore, right? So by specifying clean in the URL, it says don't load the default stuff you're supposed to load. And then I can add another parameter to the URL, which is the name of a JSON file to load. And when I do that, now we have the National Map catalog inside the State of Environment map here. And this is just, if I open this URL, let's see what this actually looks like. I was hoping it would show me and not download it, but all right, deal with that, I guess. Try to format it. This catalog's pretty big. It might take a second. Yeah, there we go. All 95,000 lines of the catalog here. Okay, so this is the JSON file that defines the national map catalog, and it's kind of what you'd expect. There's a group called national datasets. Initially, it's open, and it has these items. And the first item is called broadband map, right? And it's a WMS server at this URL, and we specify a bunch of parameters about it. If we keep scrolling down, we can see different types of data set. These are all WMS so far. For one that's not mostly WMS. Okay. So here are examples of some catalog items that are Esri map servers. So you can write a file like this, and there's documentation on the website that shows you how to do that, and host the file just about anywhere, just or any kind of static web server, and you can point any Terria map to that file, and you get a catalog. You get your catalog presented in the map, either in addition to what's already there, or if you specify clean, you can simply replace the catalog that's there. So it makes it really easy to sort of drop your data into a Terria map without even needing to deploy your own copy of it.
I think particularly for like small organizations, like here locally are the Save the Bay group who is interested in bringing together watershed information, some different environmental layers and stuff like that. They can use this to just bring in some different layers and maybe add a little bit of custom metadata of what they want to show up when people click on it right here in the JSON, and sort of customize that experience just for their little community, again with spending nothing, installing nothing, just learning the documentation for how you actually write this little JSON stuff. So I think it's a really interesting niche that this fills.
Anyone else have some questions?
I had one last. Yeah, go ahead. No.
This is Rob. I had a question again, and I'm not a developer, but I'm curious on, some of the work you've done with your Australian data.gov, some of the challenge there. I know you're early on and looking at how you will collaborate and improve that exploration, but I was just curious some of the challenges you've seen working with it so far, and I don't have enough knowledge to know if the core metadata they put in there, like ISO metadata, or are you working just with, I know you're doing mostly with the web coverage, the catalog service interface to it. Anyway, yeah, just like if you could expand a little bit with some of the work you've done there.
Yeah, yeah, since you mentioned, okay. Was somebody started to talk there, I think? No? Oh, okay. So yeah, since you mentioned metadata, that's getting at kind of one of the, I said that the work we're doing with data.gov.au is trying to apply some of the concepts from TerriaJS. And I think one of the most important concepts from TerriaJS that we want to bring to data.gov.au is the notion of being very tolerant of whatever sometimes junk is out there, right? So, rather than trying to say, all right, if you want to get your data on data.gov.au, you need to conform to this metadata standard, and it needs to be provided over this sort of service, and these are the rules, and take it or leave it, right? Which pretty much doesn't work. We're taking the approach of there's a bunch of data portals out there already. The states often have their own data portals. The local councils have their own data portals. Sometimes corporations have them, right? And we want to try to connect and federate whatever already exists out there, and to do the work necessary, and to make it easy to do the work that's necessary in order to bring those together in a unified way that makes sense, and to overall allow people to access all of the open data across Australia in a unified way, even though it started out as something that's not at all unified. Does that make sense?
Are you going to do that by
Yes,
brokering?
thanks.
Sorry, are you going to do that by brokering? Are you going to create brokers that suck data from these other places and sort of provide more standardized services by adapting them, or just what's the approach?
Yeah, that's basically the idea. CKAN has this notion of harvesting, and that's not too far from what we want to do, except that the harvesting tools need to be vastly more robust than they are today and more flexible. And we also need to stay really focused on the idea that once our data portal, data.gov.eu, harvests some data sets from another source, we don't own those data sets. Those aren't our data sets now, right? Just because we learned about them doesn't make them ours. The authoritative source of those data sets is still wherever we got them. And we need to make that really clear through the user interface, and we need to be really clear about that whenever we update the data, so that we don't put too much. We always hear horror stories about two data portals that harvest from each other. The state of Victoria here in Australia and the data.gov.au. You hear horror stories about how a data set gets added to one, and then it gets harvested by the other, and then it gets deleted on the first one, and through another cycle of harvesting back and forth, it reappears, right? And that's sort of an embarrassing thing to happen, because in order for that to even be a possibility, someone along the way lost sight of the fact that that's not their data set, right? It came from there, and if it doesn't exist there anymore, then it doesn't exist. So.
Yeah. All right. Anybody with a last question? If not, I'd like to thank Kevin again. Kevin, that was really tour de force there of all the capabilities that you've been working on there, and I know that we're going to continue to be exploring things that we can use it for and potentially add features to. Yeah, so thanks again.
Thank you once again so much for having me. And yeah, I'm happy to, if you have any other follow-up questions or anything, please just shoot me an email or whatever.
All right, and we'll see everybody in a month. Thank you very much.